Welcome to this episode of Kennedy Saves the World. It has been such a wild ride. And as promised, the president has followed through on a lot of the executive actions he said he was going to take. And it has given his enemies whiplash and his supporters delight. One person who has been covering all of it, the issues, the people, the fallout, the taunts, the cheers, Brooke Singman. She is a Fox News digital correspondent and reporter. Welcome to the podcast, Brooke.
Thank you for having me on Kennedy Saves the World.
That's absolutely right, Brooke.
Because
and
you
now
do.
you are here to help me save the world.
Thank you.
Which is a lonely job. Thank God I've got some company today.
I am so grateful to be here. Thank you.
So how much time have you spent around the president and in his orbit?
Well, I guess I've been covering President Trump since 2017 when he first became president the first time around. Of course, I was much younger then, as we all were. This was 8 years ago now, but I've definitely learned my way around the Trump orbit and have spent time with the president, around him, around his allies, around officials that are closest to him. And it has been really, really a fascinating experience and just absolutely love what I do for Fox because it has just been incredible every day. There is never a dull moment. Never.
So I remember in 2014, before he ran, we would really struggle to put a rundown together. And now there's so much news.
And we're still struggling to put the rundown together because every minute there is something new.
And it changes.
Oh, every second.
It changes every day.
The lead or the A block of a show has to change every 5 minutes, at least in this administration right now, because he did promise. I was very lucky to exclusively report the eve of the inauguration that he would take 200 executive actions on his first day in office, and he did that on his first day. And now we are,
including at an arena.
Yes, exactly. Yes, he signed them everywhere.
An event.
Yes,
before some of the inaugural balls,
Yes.
and to the delight of the crowd and people standing in line. Around city blocks, a line that extended. It looked like for miles. Because they couldn't see the president outside on inauguration, so he went to Capital One Arena and signed a bunch of these actions in person.
And if you've been to any Trump rallies or any Trump events, those lines around the Capital One Arena were not new for a Trump event. I mean, if you went to Madison Square Garden in October when Trump held that historic rally there.
Oh, you mean the Nazi rally?
Right, the Nazi rally.
Yeah.
My favorite anecdote about that is I'm walking through the halls of Madison Square Garden. Hillary has called this the Nazi rally. How could somebody have a political event there? And then on the wall of Madison Square Garden, there's a poster, and it's a remember when the Democratic National Committee had their convention in 1992 to nominate President Bill Clinton as the nominee at Madison Square Garden.
Yep.
But that wasn't a Nazi rally to Hillary.
No,
only the Trump rally was.
That's a freedom rally.
Right. But same place, same thing. Whatever. Moving right along.
Yeah.
Lots of lines around the inauguration. But of course, wherever Trump was, White House, Oval Office, in the arena, he was signing those executive actions. And in the first, 3 weeks and a day, or it's been we're on week 3. We are on week 3. And it is warp speed.
Yes.
Every single thing that he has said that he was going to do on the campaign trail, he's ticking down the list. And it's really interesting to cover. So I'm looking at what I've covered so far today and what's happening today. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how should I start? How will we talk today?
Yeah.
Because it's everything from the Justice Department to the FBI to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu coming to the White House today, Tuesday, holding a joint press conference with Trump and, having that meeting. That's the first meeting that Trump is having with a world leader that speaks volumes to the world. According to Netanyahu, that's something he said as he got on the flight to D.C. He said that Trump choosing to have his first meeting with Israel is a message to the world. The administration officials have briefed reporters, including myself, on what to expect from this bilateral meeting, this bilateral joint.
How will it be different than other meetings we've seen with Trump and world leaders or even Prime Minister Netanyahu and other presidents?
Well, Netanyahu and Trump have had a very good relationship throughout Trump's time in politics, so much so that Trump was not president in July when Netanyahu was last in the United States, but he did go to Mar-a-Lago to sit down and have a meeting with President Trump before he met with President Biden and addressed Congress. So it took President Biden many months to invite Prime Minister Netanyahu to the White House. Was that because of COVID or was that because of priorities? I think that's up to who you ask.
I mean, if you look at how progressives have been framing what happened on October 7th, almost a year and a half ago, that they would say that Israel is the enemy, and
Right.
you could clearly say that they were the ones who were driving the narrative in terms of our foreign policy with Israel. And it was a frostier relationship. There was obviously a lot more distance between the prime minister and then President Biden. But now I know Prime Minister Netanyahu is breathing a sigh of relief because he is facing some political headwinds in Israel. But this united show between the two leaders is a way for the president to make good on his promises that the U.S. is always going to support Israel.
Absolutely. And officials told me today that the two leaders in this meeting, this private meeting before their joint press conference, they will discuss the ceasefire agreement. And that is now in phase 2, according to Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff. They will discuss rebuilding Gaza, actually. Trump believes that Gaza needs to be rebuilt. He says it will take 10 to 15 years to actually do that. Now, that's not something that the Trump administration says the United States will do unilaterally, but it is something that they are focused on. Also, Trump is expected to discuss expanding the Abraham Accords and expanding that to involve other countries. So that's just one piece of foreign policy today. But of course, on Monday this week, Trump was expecting to implement 25% tariffs on all goods from Mexico, Canada, 10% tariff on goods or energy from Canada, and 10% goods from China. But of course, those tariffs have been put on pause for a month in Mexico
Interesting.
and Canada.
And in Canada.
Yes.
And both leaders in those countries are singing a very different tune. Now, I want to ask you this because as you have been following this, there was obviously a 4-month gap between his terms. A first-term president doesn't really know what it's like to be president, and they do the best they can. Sometimes they make bad staffing decisions. That was the case. The president has admitted the first time around. The second time around, it feels like he's got a lot more confidence, and he was able, I think having 4 years to stew about what he was going to do gave him the confidence to execute so quickly. Is there other strategy behind that?
I think so. And I don't even know if it was so much stewing about what he wanted to do, because a lot of these initial policies are really policies that he already had enacted when he was in office. So he's just kind of wiping out whatever Biden had done to reverse those policies that he had implemented. But in speaking to the president, I don't remember when we had this conversation, but he said he knows who his friends are in Washington now. When he got to Washington in 2017, he didn't understand necessarily how Washington worked. Now he knows how Washington works. He knows who his friends are. And it does seem that he has a very loyal group of cabinet officials, cabinet secretaries, nominees that are waiting to be confirmed, or we'll see if they don't.
Well, it does feel like he's picking people on his terms instead of being told, these are the people, because he had so many outliers in his first campaign, in his first administration, who wouldn't have had access to politics because, they were kind of, political black sheep.
Sure.
But now he's got a different type of insider whose loyalty has grown, and they stayed. And I think what's important to President Trump is they stayed loyal to him during a very dark time in his gap term, where people had written him off. He had been targeted with so many lawsuits, public and private, and the people who stayed loyal to him and to his vision, those are the ones who have been rewarded with cabinet posts.
Sure. And also, I do think it's important to note that these people that are now in the cabinet that were nominated to serve as cabinet secretaries this time around were not always Trump loyalists. These were not people in the first term that were 100% in lockstep with the president. Senator Marco Rubio and Trump ran against each other.
Little Marco.
Yes, little. And I remember in an interview, Trump said it's not L-I-T-T-L-E, it's L-I-D-D-L-E.
I remember
Little
that.
Marco. It's like my favorite thing ever.
When he said that.
My favorite thing ever. But
now he's Secretary of State.
Exactly, Secretary of State, and also he's acting director of USAID, which is something that the Trump administration is looking at shutting down.
I don't have a problem with that. I mean, I don't have a problem with that. Like Department of Commerce, Department of Education, USAID, if there are redundancies and if
Sure.
there is corruption and if these are inefficient entities that aren't doing what they're intended to do to serve the American people, shut them down.
Don't go anywhere. More Kennedy Saves the World right after this.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt just this week went through a list with reporters of some of the funds that U.S. taxpayer dollars were going towards through USAID. I think it was like $47 million for a DEI play in, I don't know,
Yeah, but it was
Peru or
millions
something.
and millions.
Millions and
Yeah.
millions and millions of dollars going to funding or programs that don't support the Trump administration's mission. And also the larger mission for, I believe, the American voter this cycle was stop taking all of our money
Yeah.
to when we here at home are struggling to, get by at the grocery store. So that's been interesting. Of course, you mentioned the lawsuits. Trump just retained Sullivan and Cromwell, which is a top law
Sullivan
law
and
firm,
Cromwell.
of course, to represent him in those ongoing legal matters in
Yeah.
New York. They are appealing the Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg guilty verdict. Now he had that sentencing right before the inauguration, but basically there was no sentence.
Yeah.
It was kind of a ceremonial sentencing that he had no fines, no punishment whatsoever. The Sullivan and Cromwell team, all of these lawyers on this new team have clerked for the Supreme Court. They are lawyer powerhouses, and they are going in now working to appeal that verdict. They're also waiting on this appeal in the New York Attorney General Letitia James's case. That was a civil fraud case involving the Trump organization. So they're working on that. And there are a number of other legal cases outside of the Trump administration that this team is working on. So
Well,
there's
it was really interesting because a lot of those cases, the prosecutors were like, well, he's president now, and the people have spoken.
Right.
It's like, oh, so this was politically motivated.
Exactly.
Because if this were just about justice and the law, then you would say, well, regardless of who he is, he's still. You could even make an argument outside of the Supreme Court ruling about official acts and
Sure.
and the president being unindictable during his time in office. If these were things that happen outside of the scope of his official acts, and these prosecutors, if these weren't political, they would say, no, we have to move forward with these cases. We'll pause. But no, they dropped these cases.
Right, completely. And I will
Jack
note,
Smith.
Jack Smith was dropped completely, both of his cases. Also, a federal judge in Florida over the summer dropped his classified records case, saying he was unlawfully appointed as special counsel to begin with. But just to note, the Sullivan and Cromwell team has been retained, not because he didn't like his original lawyers, because he liked his original lawyers so much that he appointed them to top legal posts in his administration.
Yes.
So John Sauer is the nominee for Solicitor General. You have another one of his attorneys, Todd Blanche, who is the nominee for Deputy Attorney General. And actually, news that we're following and tracking this week and over the weekend, Emil Bove, who was an attorney on Trump's legal team for all of these cases, he now is going to join the Justice Department, but currently serves as the acting Deputy Attorney General at the Justice Department. Now, there was a lot of media excitement on Friday evening, thinking that the FBI was being totally gutted and having agents fired left and right. That's not true. That's not what happened. What happened was the acting Deputy Attorney General, Bove, sent a memo to the acting FBI director. He directed him to fire 8 specific FBI agents, officials that were involved in January 6th prosecutions and prosecutions involving a Hamas terrorist. Now, I don't know why on that case, but he also directed the acting FBI director to compile a list of agents across the nation that were involved in these January 6 prosecutions and the Hamas case. And they wanted to ensure that these agents could faithfully implement the president's agenda. That's what Bove wrote in this memo. So what the acting FBI director has to do now is compile this list of these agents. A lot of media outlets are reporting that FBI agents are being fired left and right. That's not true. Yeah. They might be resigning because they're hesitant to go into an internal review.
I don't have a problem with a review like that and taking a look at whether or not systemic bias is hurting the mission of the Bureau. Because the adherence, should be more agnostic. It should be to upholding the Constitution, not necessarily the president's agenda, but upholding the Constitution.
Right.
And, that's what these agents That's what you swear an oath to.
Exactly.
It's not to the president. It's
No.
not to his agenda. It's not to the MAGA movement. It's to upholding the Constitution. And to the president's credit, he has nominated people like Tulsi Gabbard, who are constitutionalists. So
Absolutely. I actually was at the confirmation hearing last week at the Senate Judiciary Committee for the nominee for FBI Director, Kash Patel.
how did that go in
I
the
thought
room?
it was interesting to be there. I thought Cash was steady throughout. Now, Cash has an interesting background because nobody knows anything about Cash. They just throw him in this bucket as this MAGA loyalist,
Yes.
lunatic, Russia probe hoax person. But Cash is actually a very seasoned national security official. He served in the White House National Security Council. He took many a mission, dangerous mission, while working in the Trump administration to go secure American hostages in the Middle East. He also served on the House Intelligence Committee and was the top investigator who uncovered the FISA abuses that led to the Trump-Russia probe, which ultimately was debunked by special counsel John Durham
Yeah.
after special counsel Robert Mueller, after 2.5 years, found that there was no collusion. So Cash, for some reason, has been looped into this like crazy bucket. But
No,
he's
but when he was answering questions, like I felt like he spoke very clearly for
Yes.
himself. But it was interesting because, and I'm wondering what the tie is, and maybe you can help tie these together, because it feels like a lot of his nominees, whether it's Scott Bessent or Kash Patel, Pete Hegseth, they all defend themselves very similarly to the way that the president's lawyers defended him. Is that intentional?
What do you mean?
So the president's lawyers, and I think one of the reasons that, he has decided to appoint them to various important posts in the Department of Justice is because they were on message, and again, there was a strength and a confidence and a belief in the president's innocence. And these nominees appear to have the same level of confidence and strength and no nonsense. And they're also pushing back in ways that we've seen other nominees over the years sort of acquiesce
Right.
to combative senators.
I understand. I think, you know what? I think a lot of these people close to Trump have felt victimized in the last 4 years. And I think that watching the president as the model of someone who is not going to let, accusations or allegations that they believe to be false impact the way that they perform in
Yeah.
their jobs and their careers. I think that they are really following in his model. They look up to him and they want to work for him because they believe in how he wants to lead the country, but also how he leads himself after being attacked through 4 legal cases through separate jurisdictions, having his mugshot taken. Obviously Pete Hegseth had allegations against him that he was strong in denying. Kash Patel, during his hearing, Democrats brought up some of his Truth Social posts while he was a private citizen that they just didn't really like. They say it was, inappropriate, but he was a private citizen and he defended himself and is looking forward as to how he wants to lead the FBI and feels that he is in the right position to do so. So I know he has a lot of
Do you think he'll be
Republican
confirmed?
support. I do think he will be
Do you think
confirmed.
Tulsi will be confirmed?
I do think she will be confirmed ultimately. I mean, Tulsi has a lot of support from a lot of different factions of people, national security officials, law enforcement officials, intelligence officials, former and current, and people that she served with overseas. So I think that it will be tight.
Yeah.
But I do think that they will be able to garner the support
Do you
that
think
they need.
RFK Jr. will be confirmed?
I do think
Do you
he
think
will
that'll
be
be harder?
confirmed. I think that they're all going to be about equal, and it's so funny because the 3 of them had their confirmation hearings on like the same day, and I wonder how long it will take to confirm them, but I do believe ultimately they will be confirmed. Why is that? Because if Hegseth was able to get through those very severe allegations against him and was confirmed, I believe that the 3 of them will as well. Just with Republican
I thought
support.
Pete did a great job.
I do too.
I really do.
Nothing against Pete. Pete's the best.
Yeah.
But as a former colleague, but I will say I do think that if Republicans were able to rally around that nominee after dealing with all of that for weeks, I do think the 3 of them will get through. Also because I think that senators, Republican senators, they want to act independently of the president, but they do know they have 4 years.
Yeah.
And it's going to be pretty difficult if
Yeah,
they turn
and
on.
it's like Mitch McConnell doesn't care because he's older than dirt and retiring. But Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins, like it's going to be a lonely place for them.
Sure,
If
exactly.
the three amigos band together
and
too.
Trump allies always say if you go against the president's agenda, you're going to have to get ready for a primary challenge.
Yeah.
And
He primaried Thomas Massey, who prevailed, and he's one of my favorite people in the House. So, yay! Thank you, Brooke Singman.
Thank you.
I love your reporting. It's
you.
so much fun talking to you.
Thanks for having me.
So, keep doing your fine work, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you.
This has been Kennedy Saves the World, along with Brooke Singman. I'm Kennedy.
Listen ad-free with the Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app. Oh, go ahead and leave me a review while you're there. I'd love to hear what you have to say. You've been listening to Kennedy Saves the World on the Fox News Podcast Network.